Welcome back. I had a special request to talk about grief, overcoming grief. And grief, like a lot of questions in our lives, is a very, very big question. So we're probably not going to be able to answer it immediately. We live in this microwave world where we pop a pill and everything is okay. And it's just not the way that everything works. And so grief, like a lot of things, is a process. And that process can be quite big. So let's get into that. Let's get into the end of that process, which is acceptance. And that's where the magic lies. So let's get into it. So we're in this process called grief, or maybe we can't forgive somebody, or maybe we had a betrayal in our life. I had an organization and a person which I felt had betrayed me, had betrayed my trust, not for 1 year, but almost an entire decade. And it really, the realization of that kind of devastated me. And so I went to do timeline therapy, which I had learned and I loved, and I know it works. But my subconscious was not ready. So I would ask myself, is it okay to go ahead and let go of these feelings that you are feeling? And the answer always came back, no. The subconscious was not ready. And I really felt that. I really felt that, you know what? I just have to sit with this for a long time. And I allowed that to be inside of myself. I just allowed it to rest. I like to think of things in terms of a stove. And so you've got your front burners, right? And that's where you're really cooking. And then you've got your back burners. And that's the things that you're going to let simmer in the background for a while. And so I think about a lot of things that way. I have questions sometimes, and I'll put it on the back burner. And then I'll be in meditation, and I'll get a download. And it will be about that thing that's on the back burner of my mind, the subconscious. It's just simmering back there waiting for an answer. And sometimes the divine will just reach down and give the download, and here you go. You were wondering, so I had to answer, which is wonderful. But a lot of times there are these big processes going on inside of us, and if we try and control it and hold it in the front of our mind, it can drive us a little goofy, and that's probably not a good idea. So if we relegate it to the back burner and say, I'm just not finished with this, I'm just going to let it simmer in the background, and I'm not going to worry about it too much. That's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing to allow inside of yourself, to allow the subconscious to slowly chew on that material and so begin to unwind that material in the background of your mind, because you can't answer everything lickety-split. It just doesn't work that way. So the very big questions of life, the very big questions of your own life, the very big questions of, oh my God, I can't believe this happened to me, the very big questions of grief are like this. They cannot be answered lickety-split. It takes time. And you have to allow the process to unfold in the subconscious. Now, there are things that we can do to help this. And of course, my favorite is the Cryotherapy. So Ashok, my guru, he said to me, you know, if you're walking around and you have a negative emotion, you can sense that feeling, right? Okay, I don't feel okay about this. This guy cut me off on the freeway, and I'm very upset because he endangered myself and my family, and I'm upset about that, right? You can feel that feeling, and then you can OM directly into it. So how does that work? Well, I feel the feeling. I'm mad about this. This guy did this to me, and I'm mad. Okay, so I feel that, right? Where do I feel it? I feel it in the gut. I feel it in my heart. That's where I feel it. Great. Where that feeling is, mentally send an Om into that place. I'm just going to mentally go, Om, and feel that vibration, right? Om. That is the cryotherapy. I'm going to feel the feeling and mentally Om into it over and over and over again. And a beautiful thing begins to happen. That feeling that you feel inside of yourself will begin to soften. It will begin to shrink. It will begin to evaporate. When we're ready to let it go. When there is no secondary gain inside of us. In other words, if your subconscious is done with the process, I felt the feeling, it's done. I'm okay with letting it go. When that's okay, the mental oming into that feeling will evaporate the feeling. That is the cryotherapy. And my guru Ashokji, he said, this is the real Kriya Yoga because it's the one that you are doing all of your day. Now, when it comes to these very, very big things that we're not quite ready to, it's not fully answered. I have to sit with this and understand what happened. My subconscious has to let this sit on the back burner and allow it to slowly unravel. So I'm not done with it, but I can still practice OM Japa into this feeling. So let's say I feel this grief. It's in my heart, it's in my gut, wherever I might feel it. I feel that grief. I recognize I'm not going to be able to let it go all of the way, but I can OM into that feeling and it will soften the edge. And I can do it again and it will soften the edge. I can do it again and I can soften the edge of that grief. So the grief will go from being this huge gargantuan thing that I can barely manage to being something a little bit smaller that I can begin to wrap my mind around. My subconscious will now more easily begin to accept and unravel this huge grief in my life. So the OM Japa will speed up the process. And what exactly is the process that we are in? Well, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would say that we are in the grief cycle, right? We are going through the grief transition. And when she first came out with her information, it was the heyday of organizational consulting. And some of these organizational consultants saw Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's material, where she was sitting with those who were terminally ill, and they would slowly reach the conclusion that they were okay, that they could accept their own passing. And they looked at that material which she presented, and they went, oh my God. And they really heard Elizabeth Kubler-Ross when she said, this is not just death and dying. This is every single transition that we will ever go through. And so they called them the transition states. And this is the map that they gave to me in one of those consultations. And it just blew my mind. This is a map through every single transition, through every single story, because all stories are about change. All movies are about change. So every movie and every story will go through this cycle, and it is the key to every single transition in our entire lives. And doesn't that blow your mind? Isn't that amazing? So while we are coming to terms with this grief, we might bounce around within this playground of the transition. So we might find ourselves in shock. We might find ourselves in denial. No, it couldn't be happening. We might find ourselves in anger. How could this happen? We might find ourselves in bargaining. Well, what if I did this? Then couldn't it all be okay? We might find ourselves in depression. And this is where we've really come home with what has happened. We start to go into a little bit of deep grief and depression. As we are coming closer to the acceptance, this is the state we'll find ourselves in. And out of that, we will raise our spirit once more. Almost in a kind of being reborn, we will raise our spirit up and we will test to see if there is some way that we can possibly accept what is going on. So the death of the old us, we're leaving it behind. We enter into this depression and we let go and we begin to raise our spirit once more in a new form. And that's the testing. That's the trying something new. And that's the sign that we are very, very close to the final acceptance. When we try out that new us and it works, then we can accept. And those are the transition states, which is modeled after the grief cycle of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. That is the pathway of our subconscious in reaching acceptance and finally saying, you know what, it's okay. I'm okay to let go of the old idea, the old emotion, the old me. I'm okay to let go of the old me and enter into something new, a new way of being. For myself, I felt that I had been betrayed, and then one day I quoted the person who I was so upset with. And I thought, I can't be that mad at this person if I'm still quoting them. And the irony of that situation allowed me to let go. And all of the hurt that was in my heart completely released. And so that's how these things can unravel inside of us. But it's a process. It's not a one and done. It's something that takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of patience. And in the meantime, we can practice that OM Japa into the chakras. I have a training on the OM Japa in the chakras. It's called the Big Bliss, and I just love it. I love for people to have that information and be able to do that process. Everything is a riddle, isn't it? Our life is a riddle. Meditation is a riddle. Grief is a riddle. And we can place it on the back burner and slowly nibble at the edges of the riddle. And that's the only way to reach the center and to finally get our answer, to finally reach acceptance. We just nibble around the edges of that riddle slowly. If it's grief, we can nibble around the edges of the grief with OM Japa in the chakras. We just nibble around the edge of that riddle until we finally get to our answer at the center. If you find yourself in grief, it's also helpful to remember that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, after watching patient after patient who were terminally ill and knew that they were going to pass, she would watch them go through these transition states, and every single time she said they would not pass until they reached acceptance. So if you have grief for a loved one that has passed away, remember, at the very end, they absolutely accepted their own passing. The soul has to accept before it will let go of the mortal coil, all right? It has to accept. So know that your loved one accepted their own passing, and you can too. Think about that. They are the soul, and they accepted the passing of their body because they realized they are more. They are more than just the mortal form. And maybe that will add to the peace in your process of slowly reaching acceptance. Letting go doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you accept what has taken place, and your love comes up to a new level, a new form, and you realize that you accept their passing and you will cherish them forever. So I hope you loved this. If you did, be sure to hit that bell down below so I can see all of you next time.